So that was the opening of the Arinsky Piano Concerto in F minor with Richard Alston, pianist, and Paul Freeman, conductor. I am very happy to welcome today Richard Alston to Cécebron. This is my fourth outing for getting people to tell their stories. Hi, Richard.
Hi,
How are
Catherine.
you?
I'm fine. I'm really feeling good. I'm happy to do this. I was looking forward to doing this with you and sharing my stories and talking to you. And if I get a long-winded, just interject something and
Well,
cut me off.
we go back a little bit, so I think we're allowed at this point to tell our stories, and it's so important, especially now since in this we have the time. Usually, we don't have time to do anything, and so there's so many people out there doing so many positive things, and I wanted to do my little part to talk to the people that I know and have appreciated over the years. So, just as a beginning. You shared earlier some photographs of some of your relatives, and I'm going to pull those up in a second. But I want you to talk about legacy and the legacy that brought you to the point that you are today, which is grounded in your family. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I'd be happy to. And um, I actually did not realize that legacy to sometime after I had already been performing. Um, the first of all, my grandmother was a singer. She was a soprano and a pianist and a church musician, and she began taking care of me from the moment I came home from the hospital. And that was because my mother was a nurse. She went back to work, and Nana began taking care of me. And so I heard music from my infancy.
Well, wait a minute. You probably now was this your maternal
My
grandmother? You said.
maternal grandmother,
Okay,
yes.
hold up a second. I'm just going to stop for a second because I'm going to put my
Okay,
headphones on. I just want to make sure I'm not getting any feedback to
okay.
the sound that I'm
And
recording
can
you
I just
speaking.
my cell phone's over there. I don't want it to go off. Can I
Sure.
reach over there and
Yeah, I'm
and
just going to
hopefully
pause it for a minute. All right, so we are working out our technical things, and right now I'm going to share the screen so we can have a look at some photographs of family and some very interesting things that Richard has shared with me. I have a very persistent program here that keeps wanting to show itself. I don't know why. Let's see. Here we go. All right. So tell us about this lady.
okay. That is my maternal grandmother, Daisy Walker Johnson. And my when I came home from the hospital as an infant, she began taking care of me because my mother was a nurse and she went back to work right away. And Nana was a soprano. She was a pianist. She was a church musician. One of my favorite stories about her is that I have a cousin, and she told me, and my mother told me, how Nana used to sing influmadas. And all the neighbors on the street would gather in front of the house, listening to her hit those high C's in influmadas. And so she actually began teaching me piano. Unfortunately, she passed away when I was 5 years old, and but I already loved the piano. I already had.
But Richard, you know, and this is going to be about you, but I am so curious. An African American woman, she was probably like 40 or in her 50s when you were born, who studied piano and sang Rossini Inflammatus.
Yes.
Where did that come from? I mean, where was she from? What was her
Well,
background?
it's interesting because you are giving me ideas to search further. All I know is that she sang in flamadas. I need to then explore and find out where she was educated because you mentioned the legacy. Now, let me tell you how I found out about the legacy.
Mm-hmm.
I was I studied piano. I had already gone to Juilliard, and my grandfather stopped by the house one day, and he bought a book, excuse me, a box of her music. In this box the Bach inventions, Beethoven sonatas, popular tunes, and there was a legal pad. And I didn't think much of looking at it. I had it stored away. And then one day I said, let me just go through Nana's music. And I took the legal pad out, and there was a title, The Negro in Classical Music.
Mm-hmm.
This was an essay that she wrote, and she talked about Samuel Coleridge Taylor. She
Wow.
talked about Roland Hayes. And to show you how old it was, when she mentioned Marian Anderson, the Marian Anderson part talked about her singing at Lewiston Stadium. She
Where's that?
hadn't. Lewiston Stadium was a baseball field in New York City, and she won a prize, and her prize was to sing with the New York Philharmonic at Lewiston Stadium. And there was no mention of an opera of a concert career. There was no mention of the Metropolitan Opera. It hadn't happened yet. So
Wow.
that's she must have written this when maybe when she was in college. But
Well, where was she from?
that I have to, you see,
Uh
yeah,
huh.
you're giving me ideas. Here's another journey I have to go on. I have to
Well,
go on this journey
well, I
because
have to say, if just the fact that you have your maternal your grandmother and a picture of your great grandfather is a lot more than many of us can say. So I want to hear more of this story. Go ahead.
and I want you to know, a friend of mine had it laminated. You can't see it, but it's on the wall here in a gold frame. It's like 6 pages, and I
Mm,
had it laminated. And when I practiced, I looked through the piano and I can see it.
what
And
inspiration.
I felt that was her last will and testament to me, because she mentioned Nathaniel Dent. She mentioned composers that I was performing. And so I felt that she was reaching down and saying, okay, okay, you're my golden boy. That was her nickname for me. I was her
Yeah.
first grandchild. And so, but then the going back further, you mentioned legacy. My mother gave me a picture of a man. And I think she told me it was my great grandfather, but I didn't know anything about it. And it sat on a nightstand next to my bed. And you won't believe this, but it's the truth. I posted it on Facebook, and I asked people on Facebook, do they recognize this man? He's a relative of mine. And I have a wonderful cousin named Anne. And Anne was the inspiration, was the wind beneath my wings when I was a teenager, because she
Mm-hmm.
was the only member of the family who was a college trained musician. She lived in Raleigh, North Carolina. She taught music in the high school there. But anyway, she saw the picture, and she said, that's your great grandfather, John Henry Walker.
And here he is.
And that's him. And I hollered because I felt that there was a resemblance. But what really got to me was she said he was a piano player, he was a singer,
Wow.
he was a preacher, an educator. And let me tell you the one story about him. Um, she mentioned that he was living somewhere and or visiting somewhere, and he met a little boy named, they called him Benny, little Benny,
Mm-hmm.
and he brought little Benny back to live with him and his wife. Little Benny grew up to be Dr. Benjamin Mays, one of the presidents of Morehouse College.
Wow.
They named a street after him, I was told.
Mm-hmm.
And so my cousin Ann has his papers, has his sermons, and I've been begging her to copy them and send them to me. So, um, I'm literally continuing what they started.
So let me just get this clear. This gentleman is was the father of your grandmother.
Yes,
Okay, okay.
yes.
What a wonderful, wonderful story. And obviously, let me stop doing that. And and obviously, that legacy continues in you. Now, we never get any place by ourselves. And I guess today's theme is going to be legacy and family. Because, you know, for those of you that may not know Richard, if you just do a Google search, you'll find all kinds of information. But what I want to talk about is how you got to where you are. And part of that is with this foundational thing and legacy in the family. But then talk about that. You told me about the audition for one of the teachers who was
Okay,
instrumental in your advancing academically and as a teenager and into young adulthood.
but before I go to that, I
Hmm.
have to continue the legacy from after my grandmother passed, because my father and mother, they already saw, even though I was only 5 years old, they saw I loved the piano.
Hmm.
I just had a little bit of lessons. My grandmother brought me a book, but not much. And so they found a local piano teacher. They had to tell a fib that I was 6 years old, not five, because no one wanted to take a 5 year old.
Hmm.
But her name was Dorothy Early. And the legacy continues because she was a graduate of the Juilliard School,
Oh my.
1938.
African American?
Yes.
Wow.
And I don't know if I have to send you, I guess, a picture of her. But the thing about my lessons with her was that she saw I loved to play the piano. And one of the things that occurred when I was about 5.5 years old, maybe six, was she taught me out of the John Thompson piano book series. And in the first book, the first book, the hands don't play together. But in grade one, the hands played together. And the very first piece in that book started with these two notes: a C below middle C, a E above middle C, a tenth. I know the octave now, the theory not knowledge I know now.
Hmm.
But I want to tell you something. I remember that day as if it happened yesterday, because something happened inside of me. When I heard the sound of those two notes, I'll never forget it. A warm feeling came over me.
Hmm.
And to this day, I was later taught by a wonderful concert pianist who taught me to always listen to what comes out of the piano. She taught me to sing my melody. She taught me the word inflection. And as you know, I'm a big opera buff.
Oh, much more so than I am.
But I'm talking about a woman. After I was with Dorothy Early, I
Hmm.
went to, my father saw that I was about 12. He saw that the interest that I had was was so strong, even stronger than it was when I was 5. And he went to a local music teacher, and I was in the 7th grade, and he said, "Can you help my son? I think he needs another teacher."
But see, here's the thing. Dad had that perception, you know.
Yes. He sang in the church choir, my father, and he did play
Ah,
the drums a little bit.
uh-huh.
But it's interesting you say that, because one of the things that I teach music appreciation.
Hmm.
And one of the things I say to my students is this: you may not really care for the Bach and the Beethoven and the Chopin, but I'm exposing you because you might have a son or daughter that wants to sing opera, and they're 6 years old, and they're going around the house, "Ooh," and instead of telling them to shut up, or instead of giving them a Mary Blige record, you may nothing wrong with Mary Blige now, but
Hmm.
you may realize that there's something about this child. And I'm going to go back and look at those notes I took in Professor Alston's class about singers and everything.
Hmm.
And because I've met former students, I had the wonderful, wonderful experience of going to an elementary school and doing a little musical presentation for these first and second, third grade students. And a young man came up to me, African American young man came up to me. He said, "Professor Alston, you don't remember me, but I took your Black Music in America class. I took your Black contribution classes way back. And I want you to know I am teaching them what you taught me."
That's legacy too. But your dad, okay, so your
Oh,
dad,
yes. So,
I mean,
so,
there's so much we can unpack here, but let's get to your dad. I
so
want to talk about education.
the gentleman, his name was Albert Lewis. He said, "I've been
Uh-huh.
waiting," because I used to play the piano in a little school orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I've observed your son, and I've been wanting so badly to come to you and say I would like to do what I can for him. He took me to New York. He arranged an audition with a concert pianist named Sylvia Rabinoff. Um, he said, though, she's insisting that you know all your major and minor scales from memory and the arpeggios. And she asked me, before you come in, are your parents supportive? And he said, well, that answer is easy. And to help me prepare for the audition, he came by my house every day for a week at 7 a.m. And I remember I played the Chopin Minute Waltz, I played the Polish Dance by Shavanka, and I played the Turkish March by Mozart.
Mm-hmm.
And he took me to New York, and the audition lasted 3 hours.
Oh my God.
She not only heard me play everything, she asked me questions. And then one part of the audition, she was a great improviser. She said, I want you to play the Turkish March, and I'm going to go to my other grand piano, and I want to see how well you can concentrate. I'm going to improvise a whole second piano part to it,
Mm-hmm.
and let's see if you can keep playing. And even though I loved what I was here, I kept playing, and I passed. And then all of a sudden, she began talking about repertoire that I should start working on. And she took out a piece of paper, and then she wrote down some pieces she wanted me to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And by then, I knew I was accepted. And she said, before you go home, I want you to go by this store called Padelson's.
Oh,
It's right behind
Paddlesons.
Carnegie Hall.
Yeah.
And I want you to get this music. It was the Bach Preludes and Fugues, um, I think the Mozart sonatas or Beethoven sonatas.
Uh-huh.
And so we left the audition. My father was beet red. He was so
Why?
red. Many people say that we look alike. Well,
You do. That's
he
true. You
was
do.
he was red as a beet. He was grinning so much in the elevator. And Mr. Lewis, who arranged the audition, he looked down at me, and he said, Richard, if she tells you to eat, you eat that. I'm keeping this G-rated. So
Thank
you
you.
can feel okay. But um she was the one that after less than a year of studying with her, she said to me one day, do you want to be a good pianist, a good piano player, or do you want to be a concert artist?
Mm-hmm.
Now, already I had made up my mind, and I'll tell you why. I had seen when I was 9 years old, Andre Watts make his debut on television with the Young People's Concert. He was a young kid that looked like me,
Mm-hmm.
and he was loving playing the piano. And the other thing was I saw a movie, a rare movie called Sincerely Yours. It starred Liberace, and he played a concert pianist. And when I watched him play in this movie, he loved what he was playing. He loved the piano. And so I already knew I want to be a concert artist. And she said, well, it's going to be a lot of work for the rest of your life,
Mm-hmm.
not just for the next couple of years, but for the rest of your life. And one of the great things, I followed her, all her words of wisdom, all her lesson assignments. My father began taking me to concerts every weekend. He took me to hear every great pianist, from Rubinstein to Lily Krauss to George Bolet, and read that and look at the concerts. He joined the Great Performance Concert Series at A.B. Fisher Hall, and so the thing was, I knew I wanted to do this, but
Mm-hmm.
one of the greatest things, I've experienced many blessings, many blessings, but one of the greatest experiences I had was I sent Mrs. Rabinoff a copy of my CD. And what's interesting was she performed the Arinsky Piano Concerto. That was in her repertoire. And in fact, I remember being at her home in Florida, and she had the orchestral parts on this high shelf in the closet. And
Uh-huh.
I was trying to get to them. She said, Richard, you'll get them. She just wait. But one of the great blessings was she wrote me a letter. And the beginning of the letter started off saying, remember when I asked you, did you want to be a great a piano player or concert artist? And she said, you are now. a
How
concert.
wonderful. What a wonderful relationship. This relationship went through high school into college at Juilliard,
Yes,
right?
yes. Well,
Yeah.
what the thing about her and my experience with her was I began performing with orchestra when I was 16. I learned the Tchaikovsky Piano Concerto, and she would teach. She was teaching at Brevard Music Festival, and
Mm-hmm.
I went there as a student. I already knew the first move of the concerto. I auditioned, and for the competition, I won. With the play with the orchestra. I still have that recording, by the way.
Yeah.
um, and then 2 years, a year later, I made my New York debut with the Symphony of the New World at Avery Fisher Hall, Lincoln Center, playing the Tchaikovsky Piano Concerto.
Now this is before you went to Juilliard.
This is before Juilliard.
Yeah. So
And
how did you manage that schedule? Because now this may seem people that we're focusing on because Richard has a huge career, but I'm always interested in the beginning stories because your dad was taking you to concerts. You lived in New Jersey and
yes,
you're
still
still
do.
there, and your dad was taking you across the river
Yes,
to Manhattan. The concerts get out at 10 o'clock at night.
yes.
Maybe 11, you get home like 11:30, 12, and you had to be at school at 8 o'clock the next day
Well, we went on the weekend,
on the
and
weekend.
so the every now and then there might have been a concert in the week, but it was
Hmm.
mostly Saturday and then Sunday afternoon. So we went to these Sunday afternoon concerts. Uh, but to show you also um, how much he recognized my talent. When I was about 10 years old, before I went to Mrs. Rabinoff, so
Hmm.
about 10 or 11, he took me on a New York excursion. And when we went to New York, he showed me Carnegie Hall. We went to Lincoln Center. And the last part of the excursion was to visit the Juilliard School. At that time, the Juilliard School was on Claremont Avenue, uptown. And we went there. And when we went in, the woman said to us, well, we're going to go into the new building at Lincoln Center. But she gave me the catalog. I remember it was gray. And so that was the second time Miss Early had talked to me about the Juilliard School because she went there.
Hmm.
But this was already laying the groundwork that this is where I should go.
Yeah.
And I remember reading the audition. I was only like 11, and they talked about learning playing all the major and minor scales, which I could do
You
already.
said got that
But
one. Yeah.
yeah, I got that. But so this all happened. The concert debut when I was 17 in New
Hmm.
York City, and you mentioned schedule. The only thing when you first said that word, what came to mind was I was a teenager and I was very lonely. I was very, very lonely because I would practice. I would come home from school. I would practice 3 or 4 hours a day. But that wasn't where the loneliness came in. The loneliness came from my high school uh, fellow students didn't understand what I was doing.
And that's part of the problem of being someone so very talented and pursuing your goals early in life. It's like, well, hey, why don't you want to play football or play basketball or let's go to the club or whatever. And you have to be disciplined. People, anybody out here watching or listening, for you to be a professional of anything, you have to be committed and disciplined. Even though you hear
Yes.
stories about people acting crazy, at a certain point they had to arrive at a certain level of proficiency. But now you've mentioned your dad, and we have to mention your mom.
Yes.
Uh, how did she react to all of this?
Okay. My dad and my mom, they were almost opposites. My mom was the disciplinarian. Not my father. He is a bubbly personality. He's a joy with a joie de vivre of life.
Yeah.
But my mother, she was the disciplinarian. Give you an example. I was playing on originally I had my grandmother's piano, but that got too old and was broken down basically. And they rented a Wurlitzer spinet. But the time came where I needed a baby grand. And at that time in Newark, there was a piano showroom called the Griffith Piano Company.
Mm-hmm.
And an example of her being a discipline, they took me there and I played on a Chickering piano and I started playing the Mozart C major sonata, but I couldn't get through it all. When I got home, my mother had the catalog of the Chickering pianos. She came into my bedroom and she said, "You want this piano? Don't you ever start a piece and not be able to finish it. I'm going to pin this to your wall and you look at that picture and you go and you practice that Mozart until you can play the whole thing from beginning to end." I'm laughing at your face. I'm sorry. The expression on your face. I'm sorry.
I met your mother. She didn't seem she was that tough.
Oh, oh yes.
Oh gosh.
Oh yes.
God
She
bless her. God bless her soul.
she was um I guess if how could they were the yin and the yang.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
and I will never forget. I performed. I don't think it was the Liszt concerto, but I went back to Brevard, and I performed the Hungarian Fantasy by Liszt,
Mm-hmm.
which is their recording of me playing it at 17 or 18 on YouTube. But I'll never forget. My father told me this story that he was just full of life. And after I played it, the audience went crazy. He grabbed my mother and kissed her. She pushed him away and said, "You'll mess me up. You mess up."
Well, I know being a woman, there are two ways to look at this. You were one of probably one family there, if you know what I'm saying. And you
Yes,
had to represent, you know.
yes.
But that's so cute. That is so cute. So now listen, let's talk about we talked about your music teacher and we talked about legacy. Um, let's talk about Juilliard and post Juilliard life and career choices. Because when you get to Juilliard, um, we become one of many, many very, very talented people. How did you maintain and sustain yourself through the Juilliard experience?
My Juilliard years were interesting. Um, I think the first thing that comes to mind is that, believe it or not, at the last minute, I didn't want to go to Juilliard,
Why is
even though I
that?
had, even though I had been accepted.
Mm-hmm.
The reason was I was going to study with a new teacher, and Mrs. Rabinoff had done so much developing my artistic self, my piano technique.
Yes.
She was my piano mother, and I didn't want to. I didn't want to go to anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother actually called her, and she said, "Mrs. Rabinoff, I'm calling you because Richard doesn't want to go to Juilliard now, and I don't know what to say to him." And she said, "I'll tell you what to say to him. You tell him I'm kicking him out of the nest. It's about time that he got another opinion, and there's nothing else to be said. He is going to Juilliard, and I'm kicking him out. He has to fly now."
Mm-hmm.
And we
Mother to
still,
mother conference.
yes, and
Yeah.
we still maintained a relationship
Uh-huh.
because after I played my first master class at Juilliard, I didn't feel I played well. I went to the phone booth, I called her, and I was crying, and she said, "I'm sure you didn't play as bad as you think you did," and everything. And so there was that adjustment of leaving the womb. And the other adjustment was that this new teacher that I had, he had his own playbook, so to speak, literally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he felt that I needed to play more Bach. He felt I needed to play more Mozart. And by that time, I was playing Tchaikovsky piano concerto. I was playing pieces by Liszt,
That's more
Chopin.
of your meat though, the romantics, right?
Right. Well, what happened after about 6 months of this, or the first year, I felt I couldn't play anymore because all that technique that I had developed was not needed in playing Mozart. He didn't balance it out. He didn't realize that I was able to do what I did because of my faith in Sylvia Rabinoff and following everything she told me to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't I didn't know how to accept this.
So was this a crisis, a moment of
Well,
crisis?
I did what he told me to.
Mm-hmm.
I played the Mozart sonata. I learned the Bach, and then unfortunately, unfortunately or whatever, fate had its. He became very ill,
Hmm.
and his wife began teaching me, and a light went on because one of the first things she had me working on was the Greek piano concerto. And this sounds really sad. I used to listen to recordings of myself when I played with orchestra when I was 17 and shake my head, I'll never play like that again. And then
That's
when
very challenging for someone so young. I mean, to arrive at Juilliard having performed major piano concertos. And for those of you that don't know, concerto is with orchestra,
yes,
not just a sonata in a recital hall. You've got like maybe 50 or 100 people, depending upon the composition, sitting behind you, accompanying you. That's major. So then here you are, what, 21 years old or so?
yeah,
And,
20. Hmm.
and saying to yourself, I don't think I'll ever play like that again. How did you come out of that, Richard? How did you deal with it?
I came out of it first a little bit because his wife began teaching me the Greek piano concerto.
Mm-hmm.
Then, sadly, he passed away, and I had to go to another teacher at Juilliard. And the next teacher I went to, his name was Joseph Reyes. From the very first lesson, he could not understand why Freundlich didn't understand me. And from the
Mm-hmm.
very first lesson, I was learning a sonata by Beethoven that opened with variations. And he said to me, Richard, when you play theme and variations, you have to remember that the theme is the parent and the variations are the children. They resemble the parent, but they're different. And we connected
Mm-hmm.
because this was the type of lesson that I would get with Mrs. Ravenel. I learned a piece, the very first impressionistic piece I ever learned was a piece called The White Peacock by American composer Charles Griffiths.
Mm-hmm.
And I fought learning this. Mrs. Rabinoff, we fought over this because I didn't, it was new to me. This whole impressionistic sound was new to me. And I came to the lesson and she said, well, I want to hear the White Peacock. And I said, no, not today. I don't. She said, okay, I'll hear the Chopin. Second lesson I came to, okay, let's go with the White Peacock. I said, no, Mrs. Rabinoff, not today. Let's do the
I
list.
know that third lesson she clamped down the.
Wait a minute. The third lesson. Now, my father, you mentioned him driving to concerts. He drove me. She lived in New York City on 33 Riverside Drive. He would
Okay.
drive me to my lesson. My lessons with her were like 2 or 3 hours long.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so he would go to a movie while I had the lesson. So the third lesson I came and she said, okay, we're going to start with the White Peacock. And I said, she said, you didn't practice it, did you? And I said, no.
Uh
She said,
oh.
I'm not teaching you today. I'm not teaching you. It's against my principle. She said, next lesson you come to me and you'll have a lesson. And she said, well, your father, he dropped you off, right? And I said, yes. Okay, help me clean my house. She took, she took, she took, she took my mother's check,
Uh huh.
and it was a great sacrifice for that check.
Mm-hmm.
And I never told my mother what happened. It wasn't until about mm, maybe 10 years later, I was teaching a student at my mother's house. And I told the student this story. And my mother was in the kitchen and she came out of the kitchen and looked at me. And,
Maybe she gave you that look, huh?
yes, yes, because and I knew that if it had if she had found out 10 years
Ooh
earlier,
wee.
I would have gotten more than a look. But I finally learned the piece, and let me end the story with this. I
Yeah.
learned it, but you know what Mrs. Rabinoff had me do?
What?
She said, "I want you to go to the Bronx Zoo, and I want you to watch peacocks for an hour. A peacock does not walk like a pigeon. Okay? If you're going to play this piece effectively, you have to have an image in your mind in your soul what this piece is about. You
Mm-hmm.
have to know what a peacock, when the male expands the fan, and he can still run with the fan, but there's a grace when he runs with that fan.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a part in the piece where she said, this is where the fan opens up.
Well, now, Richard, I have a couple more questions, but I'm going to jump to the end and then come back to the middle.
Okay.
How have these early lessons informed your teaching, in particular as a instructor in piano, and then you also teach vocal master classes, and you are a choir director and whatnot. So, how have these lessons informed your teaching when you're working with people to impart to them learning and interpretation and artistry?
Well, we'll talk about the piano students first.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the challenges that I have, I do piano master classes, not the web, I do piano master classes. And one of the challenges that arises many times is that I always felt as a child music in my soul. And then when I went to Mrs. Rabinoff, like that white peacock story, she gave me images that I had to bring forth in the music. The
Mm-hmm.
problem I find many times when I teach master classes or work with students is that everything is the notes. It's everything is the black and white page. And how fast you can play it if it's an etude, okay? But there's never any connection to the soul. And so this is the challenge. But I was talking to a friend of mine the other day about this, and I guess because I'm an emotional person, as maybe everybody so sees right now, but I've learned how to get to that part of the student. I'll give you example number one. One of my, I call him my piano son because I worked with him since he's 9 years old. He graduated this past spring from Westminster Choir College. He's studying in
Wonderful.
Colorado. Um, and he had a lesson with me when he must have been about 16 or 17. And he played a piece called In the Hall of the Mountain King by Grieg. And this piece starts very, very softly, and it builds and builds and builds and builds to the last page is a big climax.
Mm-hmm.
He played it for me, and he played the fortissimo, he played the chords and everything. But I said to him, something's missing. There should be fire in this last page. There should be excitement, maybe even a little anger, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I said to him, and his mother dropped him off the lesson. She was sitting right there on the couch. I said, do you remember an occasion where your mother made you so angry that you didn't know what you were going to do? You
Mm-hmm.
were so angry at her. You were so mad at her. Okay? You know what? You don't have to tell me what happened, but remember that. Now, bring that to that last page of the piece. And he did.
So you had him tap into those, you were able to give him
Yes.
to access those feelings and emotions and
Well,
direct it into his playing.
when I was at
That's a
Juilliard,
teacher.
when, when
That's
I was at Juilliard,
mm-hmm.
I my friends to this day were mostly dancers, actors, and singers. Why? Because all three of you deal with a story in one way or another, or
Mm-hmm.
lyrics. You see, as a pianist, we just have the black and white. That's all that's there. So we have to get underneath the notes. Mrs. Rabinoff, I was doing a sonata called The Tempest, and they say in order to play this really sufficiently, you should read the Shakespeare play. But she said to me, you have to understand, she said, what Beethoven went through in his life.
Oh God,
And
yes.
and then, but wait, it didn't stop there. She said, look above my bookcase. Do you see that? She said, do you know what that is? And I said, no, that's called a death mask. That is a death mask of Beethoven. Now I want you to look at it because look at it. Notice, even in death, he was not at rest. He
Mm-mm.
was still feeling pain. Look at his face.
And in his 50s, no less.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now when you play this sonata, remember how he looked.
Mm-hmm.
Play this. I didn't know my teaching. I coach singers every now and then. Um, I have a television show that I do at the college I produce. And the very first episode, I had a very talented young man, a singer, sing. And we were filming. He sang for me. And he sang a wonderful, wonderful song by Donny Hathaway called A Song for You.
Oh, yes.
And I've been in so many places in my life and time. And he sang it. And I said, okay, you sang it well. I said, but answer me this question. Who are you singing to? Who are you singing? When you say, I'm singing this song for you, who is that? You don't have
Mm-hmm.
to tell me, but do you know who that is? And if you do, okay, I want you to sing it again for me now. And you think, when you say those words, you picture that person. Carolyn, he sang the first few measures and he broke down in tears. And we had to stop the filming. And we actually used the take that he did before I told him to do that. But this is what I find so many instrumentalists don't do. You
Mm-hmm.
know, music can sound beautiful, yes,
But it's
but
soulless.
there's something. I'm sorry to be long-winded, but I got to tell you
It's all
this
right.
story. Um, I have performed many, many times, and there's a video of me playing it on YouTube called Troubled Water. And the first time I heard a pianist play it, I fell in love with the piece, and the pianist played it very well. But something inside me said there was more to it than what I heard today, and I have to play it. And so the pianist sent me the music. I learned it, and then I began in my research on spirituals. I knew they were coded spirituals
Mm-hmm.
that had double meanings, and I was curious that Margaret Bond called it troubled water. And I knew the story that if you were a slave seeking freedom, at some point the dogs were chasing you. But if you got into the water, they would lose the scent. And when I saw the movie Harriet, I was so moved when I saw the scene. But my feeling was this, that when the slave got into the water, all the pain, all the agony, all the misery got into that water with them. And that water could have been as calm as you would believe. But once they got into the water, it wasn't the same. The water was now troubled.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I play Margaret Bond's Troubled Water, this is what's going through my soul.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's based upon the spiritual wade in the water, which is sung in baptism, and we know was coded, but was more to it. And there's a section of the piece where she actually imitated African drums. And so this is what I do. This is my feeling about troubled water. When you watch me talk about this, my friends out there, um, this is my feeling. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
this is how I feel about troubled water.
And you
And,
know something, Richard? I agree with you in particular. One thing I say I teach as well, not as long, but I am teaching now. And one of the things I say to my students, I said, there's a difference between being a musician and an artist.
oh yes,
And what you're talking about are the qualities that make an artist. And you have to go deeper, and it's risky, and sometimes it's scary, and sometimes it's absolutely frightening. But when you can access that and then be able to bring it forth to share with the people that you're making art for, not just yourself, it takes you to another level.
oh yes.
Now, speaking of which, because I'm always about this time, I was like, oh my God, I'm running out of time. I want you to talk about some of the highlights of your career. You talked about Paul Freeman and the New World Symphony. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Can you talk about working with Everett Lee
Yes,
and
I'd be happy to.
and then some of your time down the street at Lincoln Center as Jasbo Brown?
Oh,
And then I
sure.
want to hear about some of your future projects. Okay?
Well, if we go back to when I made my debut at Lincoln Center, it was with an orchestra called the Symphony of the New World, which was a symphony that consisted of African American instrumentalists. And this was a groundbreaking ensemble. because here you had these fabulous, fantastic musicians.
And Ken, if I can just interject here, this preceded Chicago Sinfonietta.
Well, I never, when
This
I did,
preceded the
yes,
Sphinx Foundation.
yes,
This
yes.
preceded the
We're
was it
talking
the
about the 60s
Festival
and
of
the
Colors?
70s.
Yes. Uh huh.
Yes, the 60s and the
Yeah.
70s. And um, these musicians were not being hired by major symphony orchestras. So
Hmm.
this was the first, yes, it preceded everything you just mentioned, that consisted all of these African American musicians. Well, I mentioned that Mrs. Rabinoff lived at 33 Riverside Drive. In that same building was a wonderful cellist named Kermit Moore.
Oh yes.
His wife is a composer. And from what I was told, one day they ran into each other in the elevator, and she mentioned this student that she had, and that she knew of his orchestra, and that perhaps I could play for him. And they actually had a competition, and the I competed, and I didn't know that they were listening to students from all over the country, but I was at Brevard, and I this was maybe about 6 months after I auditioned, or
Hmm.
even longer than that. And I was told that Mrs. Rabinoff wanted to see me, and she was in the cafeteria. And
Hmm.
her husband, by the way, was a concert violinist who was one of the only two American pupils of Leopold Auer. The other pupil of his was Yasha Heifetz, and they were
Wow.
friends.
Okay.
So, so I went into the cafeteria, and her husband, his name was Benno, and she was sitting at the table, and I said, I thought someone had died.
Oh.
They looked so serious.
Uh huh.
And I sat down, and Benno looked at me and said, on December 15th, you're making your debut in New York City, Tchaikovsky Piano Concerto with the Symphony of New World. And I looked at Mrs. Rabinoff, and she said, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I know they were besides themselves. They probably didn't want everybody to see their excitement. Oh my God.
No, well, Mrs. Rabinoff, first thing she said, we got to get to work.
Of course.
Even though I knew the concerto, I had just played the last movement, the first one I played the year before, you know, but it was a wonderful experience. And again, I have a recording of one of our rehearsals,
Be
and
careful. I might dig up some of those and put the clips, a few of the clips in.
it's a
But
cassette, as Mrs. Randolph used to call them. But what's interesting about that recording is Everett Lee, I think he's 100 years old now, and his son contacted me because he found the flyer of my performance with the orchestra. And he contacted me to say that I'm getting my father's archives together. And he said to me, um, we don't have any recordings of my father conducting an orchestra. And
what?
I said, I do. I have Mrs. Rabnoff recorded every one of my rehearsals. And
So you did the Tchaikovsky with Everett Lee.
yes, at Lincoln Center, Avery
Uh huh.
Fisher Hall. And
Awesome.
so I had the rehearsal cassette transferred to a CD, and I
Mm-hmm.
mailed it to him and his father. So I said, now you have and you can hear his father talking to the orchestra.
He's over in
So
Norway, right?
I think so,
Sweden.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was also my introduction to his former wife, Sylvia Oldenley,
Oh yes.
because
There's a
she
name.
she was with him at the time, and I remember her playing, and her talking to me. And so that was, and we were reunited, so to speak, a couple of times. But my best reunion with her was when you mentioned Jazzbo. I'm a sponge, and I seek all the knowledge I can get. And so there was a gentleman that I cannot think of his name, but he and his wife, she was a soprano, and they did a joint recital at Alice Tully Hall when I was in high school. And she had passed, but someone said to me, and I was teaching at the Harlem School of the Arts at that time,
Mm-hmm.
that he was good friends with Hall Johnson. And
Wow.
I think I've worked with you. I was accompanying or collaborating with all these singers on Hall Johnson's arrangements. I got his phone number and I called him. And I said, I don't think we've ever met. but I was just told that you were a friend of Paul Johnson's, and I accompany all these singers on his spirituals. Could I please come by and I'll pay you if you like me to? And I just want to hear your stories. You
Mm-hmm.
know this man,
Mm-hmm.
and I just want to hear your stories about him. And so
So what was
um,
that like? What was that like?
it was wonderful because you see, there was this passing down of information, of knowledge, and you know, whenever I hear of a possibility of doing something like that, I mentioned Sylvia Olden Lee. She had her own ideas about how jazz bow should be played, and what I did research before I played at the Met. I said I want to find out. There was a essay written about Jasbo Brown by the same man who wrote the play Porgy. And what I found out was that Jasbo Brown was a pianist who played with so much enthusiasm that the legend is that when he played, people would yell, "More jazz, more jazz." And the legend is that's one of the legends of how the term jazz may have come about. And so
Fascinating.
what I did was, when I found I was going to play jazz with the Met, I found out that Carmen de Lavallade was going to do the choreography. And I had met her, but more importantly, she did a performance with the Boston Pops Orchestra where she danced and spoke the what's the poem, not the creation by Lawrence Dunbar, and she danced while they played the planets. And I happened to
Wow.
meet her in the elevator, and I told her how much I loved that. And she said, "Oh, child, I had to stop performing that." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because every time I performed it, I had to pay royalties to the host organization." But I got her phone number, and I said, "I'm going to play Jazz Bow at the Met, and I
Mm-hmm.
hear you're choreographing. Can I please come and sit in on your dancers? Because I don't want to wait until we're on the stage of the Met. I want to see what you're going to have them do, and then I will be able." And I'll never forget, I was warming up, and one of the dancers came over and she said, "Wow, I can really grind you playing that." And so the point was, when I play jazz bow, I don't just sit and play the piano. I did her choreography at the piano. I was dancing. I was waving my hand
Now
in the air.
I just want to say this to everyone. I saw his performance, and Richard was in character and playing. I mean, it was just so very exciting just for the opening of this wonderful American opera that's done so often. Now, Richard, I want to ask you.
We didn't talk about Paul Freeman, but I'll go ahead. What do you want to ask?
Well, let's go back to Paul Freeman because
Okay.
the Met is a very particular thing, and Porgy and Bess is a very particular thing. Um, in your work with various conductors like Everett Lee and Paul Freeman, do you find in them advocates and people who are just it's wonderful to work. It's not an adversarial kind of relationship because oftentimes conductors are it's my way but the highway, that kind of thing. Can you talk about their work style and how it fit into to who you are as an artist?
Well, every experience I've had with a conductor has always been positive, always. Um, when I don't remember a lot about working with Everett Lee. I remember going to rehearsals, being at the rehearsals. I remember rehearsing on the stage of Avery Fisher Hall. Uh, I remember him as being very kind to me,
Mm-hmm.
and there was never any type of tension. When I worked with Paul Freeman, first of all, the way it came about was a dream come true. I found all of these recordings of piano concerti that were not being performed, and I dreamt of performing a rare piano concerto. I dreamt of recording a rare piano concerto, and I mentioned Mrs. Rabinoff went to Brevard Music Festival. I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned going there and playing the Tchaikovsky Piano Concerto. 10 years, 1985, after my last performance there, I was invited back to open the festival.
Wow.
And I played Rhapsody in Blue. And Mrs. Rabinoff, it was so funny because she wasn't going to fly out there. And I said, you have to be there. You have to be there. And so she flew out there, and my parents were there. After I played, there was a woman who also taught piano when I was there.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, you need to meet Paul Freeman. And I said, I knew of him because I used to get all these magazines and all these people, all these African American musicians when I was a teenager. I had pictures of them all in my bedroom, a
Wow.
pianist all in my bedroom. And so I knew of him as being a Black conductor. I knew of him because he also had recorded that great anthology of the Black Composer series that Columbia Records produced.
Mm-hmm.
And so she said, she said, I'm going to give you his phone number and I want you to call him. And I said, just out of the blue, she said, okay, I'll tell him that you're going to call, introduce him. And when I called him, he said that he heard I was a wonderful pianist. And we talked about what I would play. And I said, well, I want to do a rare concerto. My first choice was the Rubinstein D minor. And he said, well, there's already two recordings of CDs of that. He said, but how about the Urinsky? And I said, okay. And so the goal was that I would do the Urinsky Piano Concerto
Mm-hmm.
and also the set of etudes by Urinsky. Now, when I spoke with him, it was around July, August. I just come back from Brevard. The plan was that the coming spring, during the Easter break, I would go to the Czech Republic with him and record the CD. Not even a week after we scheduled that, he called me, and it was still July, and he said, Richard, I've had a cancellation. Can you be ready the weekend of Thanksgiving?
Oh God. That's a lot of music.
Yes, yes.
And just now,
I
it's
began practicing
not
eight.
easy.
Well, when that happened, I said, I have no choice to say, I prayed for this. I wanted this.
Mm-hmm.
And some people say, be careful what you pray for or what you desire.
Uh, yeah.
And so I began practicing 8 hours a day. I,
Okay, I have to stop there because oftentimes we can put ourselves under duress because we have something coming up and we practice more than maybe we should. Isn't 8 hours a lot for even for a pianist?
well, I've never heard of practicing more than you should. Okay. I've never heard of that. Um, my hands never got tired. I've never had
Okay.
any problems. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But I did 8 hours. I started off the day in the morning doing 2 hours,
Oh, you
late
would break
morning.
it up.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It was four sets of 2 hours each. And I knew I had to have 95% of the music learned by September 1st because I was going back to the college to teach. And so I began practicing like a crazy person, like a mad person, because
Mm-hmm.
I wanted this. And so I learned the music. I had a pianist who came and rehearsed it with me, and went to flew to the Czech Republic and recorded it. And you played the opening of the first movement. Um, I hadn't even heard the playbacks really, but I spoke with Paul Freeman over the phone, and he said, Richard, something really beautiful and special happens in the second movement.
Mm-hmm.
And when I play, I mentioned this earlier, Mrs. Rabinoff taught me to sing the melody like a singer,
Yes.
project the melody. And she taught me the word inflection, meaning if you have two notes, they should not sound alike. If it's ascending, the second note should be more than the first. If it's descending, the second note should be less than the first. More importantly, I fell in love with opera when I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I, in my mind, I remembered hearing Leontine Price the first time in concert, and I cried, the beauty of her voice. And um, I remember falling in love with the pianissimi that Caballé would do. And so when I play, I am not thinking as well as a pianist. I even have a word for it. It's piano canto. There's bel
I
canto.
love it.
There's bel
Yes.
canto for the singers,
Yes.
and there's
Yes.
piano canto for the pianist.
Hmm.
And a colleague of mine listened to my CD, and she said, Richard, when I listen to the second movement, you really are a frustrated singer. You thought you were Caballé. I heard you take the melody up, and when you got to the top note, you play pianissimo.
And that's not easy on a piano, by the way, people.
No,
Now,
no.
I will say this. Um, I'm not sure if it was at Tanglewood, but somebody said, or probably before that, really. I'm not good. I don't have a big brain like you where I can remember all the details. But it was said to me, singers need to play and instrumentalists need to sing when
Yes,
they're making music.
yes.
And there's a lot of truth in that. And I think, what's so wonderful that we have these experiences. How long were you in the Czech Republic? What were the recording sessions like? Just briefly.
If I remember correctly, we had, I think, two sessions with the orchestra,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll never forget. I was highly complimented because the Oresky Concerto has all these octaves, and after we did one portion of it, the string players were laughing, and they had said, "Oh, something about yes, yes," and I said to Paul Freeman, "What did they say?" And they
Mm-hmm.
said, "Horowitz octaves."
It's a beautiful. Were you in Prague?
Well, I was in Prague. I
Yeah.
didn't no sightseeing, no sightseeing is what I teach, no sightseeing, because I was strictly focused. I had sessions with Paul while I was there away from the orchestra, but and this is the story usually when I travel. Many times, I don't go out sightseeing because I'm really interested
You
in
go
just,
after,
yeah.
after,
If there is an after, usually I
if you
catch a
have
plane
time. Yeah.
and come right back.
Yeah.
But I was in Prague. In fact, people couldn't believe that I was in this wonderful musical town, city, and didn't go see anything. And I said, it was,
You're there for work.
I was there for work. It wasn't on the
Yeah.
agenda.
Yeah.
It wasn't on the agenda.
I will say I spent a little time in Prague and I had some time to get around and see things. Um, One night I was with a friend and we were passing the back of this theater, and my friend spoke Czech. He was Czech, and he was speaking to the guard, and he said, "Yes, yes." The guy threw a cigarette. He says, "Come on, we're going in," and it was the actual theater where Don Giovanni had premiered, and we stood on the stage. This was like at 11 o'clock at night, and the guard took us up to the little museum that was a tribute to Mozart and whatnot. But Prague is a beautiful place, and you'll just have to go back. Maybe we can go
Yes,
back, you know.
yes,
But so exciting to have these opportunities because they're so few, and for a pianist, there's a lot of competition.
yes,
It's very stiff.
yes,
Um, not even to play with an orchestra. There are many great pianists who don't have the opportunity to even play with an orchestra. So you've done it multiple times, in addition to being an educator, in addition to starring as Jasbo Brown on the stage of the Met, which unto
You
itself
mentioned,
was an
you
experience.
asked me, you asked me about highlights of the career. I felt like my family calls me Ricky. I felt like Ricky in the Land of Oz when I was at the Met because I had watched. First of all, I started listening to the broadcast on Saturday when I was in high school,
Mm-hmm.
and I had my favorite opera singers, and I had recordings. And when I was there, there was one night we left the rehearsal, and Placido was coming in, and there
Oh,
was another day for rehearsal. Pavarotti was rehearsing in another room,
oh
and
gosh.
I love opera. I love singers. You know that. I really I really enjoy collaborating with singers. So
Yeah.
that was magical. That was so spectacular. And I did have a second chance to do Jazzbo when they did it in New Jersey, the New Jersey Opera. they heard I did Jasmine Brown, and they
Uh-huh.
sent me a letter and called me and said, "Would you come and do it in our production?" And so I enjoy that, and that's something that most pianists never get. I mean, there's only one other opera. I think it's Adriana Lecouvreur, where there's a pianist on stage and he plays.
I
I
can't remember. I did
Well,
that opera a while
it's
ago.
either that opera or La Rondine,
Mm-hmm.
but that was a spectacular. And then another career highlight was 2 years ago. I mentioned Sylvia Olden Lee. They honored her at a big concert at Carnegie Hall, and I was asked to come in and accompany the uh, 200 voice choir in the Beethoven Alleluia from the Mount of I think it's from Mount of Olives, and ending with the Lift Every Voice and Sing by Roland Hayes, with him, Roland, not Roland Hayes, Roland Carter conducting. But
Mm-hmm.
I want to mention this to you because when you were talking about you were on the stage of where Mozart did the Don Giovanni, what went through my mind was when you were out on that stage, did you embrace the spirits? And I know people out there watching think Alston is nuts. He's
No,
crazy.
no, no. People that have, if anyone has seen, I'm doing a series, but there's always this moment of spiritual revelation that I think as artists we have. And even more so than in Prague when I was in Rome and I was in the same dressing room that Maria Callas had. So, um, but Richard, let's
Well,
talk.
so I just gotta say something. I just gotta say something. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to be so long-winded. I'm sorry, people. Um, but when you mentioned that, when they honored Sylvia Olden Lee, and I walked out on the stage,
Mm-hmm.
a friend was in the audience, and later said to me, "You had the biggest smile on your face when you walked out." And I said, "Yes, for two reasons. One, I watched a pianist named Arthur Rubinstein when I was a teenager come out on stage.
Mm-hmm.
And he seemed to be so happy that I was there to hear him, and he smiled. Second, that was a dream. Many people dream of performing on Carnegie Hall
Oh
stage.
God.
And
Yeah.
I have seen concerts there, but more importantly, I was feeling all of those spirits with me, all of those legends. There was a pianist, Simone Barrere. He died on stage in Carnegie Hall playing the Greek piano concerto.
Oh my.
And so all of this, I couldn't help but smile.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't help but smile.
And our
I was
art
blessed.
and our art should make us happy. We
Yes,
should be happy and joyful. And when
yes,
we're working around people who, like you and some of my other colleagues, who are encouraging and positive and reinforcing to one another, it just makes it a joy.
yes,
Now, I want to
yes.
hear a little about what's coming up for you, education wise, performance wise, and unfortunately, then we're going to have to wrap up. But
Okay.
it's
Well,
great.
right now I'm teaching online classes because of the coronavirus.
Yeah.
Um, I am actually following the advice of I'm looking at you in the camera, of a wonderful singer friend of mine. She posted on Facebook, and she was addressing all the young musicians, all the that are right now at home. They can't go out. At that time, it was in the summer. They weren't in school, and she said, "I hope you are using this time to learn repertoire, to study your roles, and practicing." And so when I heard, like I said, I'm a sponge. When Miss Carolyn said Rome, when I read that she said this, I said yes. I'm going to practice, and one of my projects have has been to every week I record. I have a whole library of concert arrangements of hymns,
Mm-hmm.
and I began playing for church when I was 6 years old. And so, at the beginning of my church services, when we were having church inside the sanctuary, I would begin the service with a prelude. So I have been recording what I call Sunday musical meditations. And if you're a Facebook friend of mine or not, just go to my YouTube, because another wonderful soprano or singer friend of mine said to me after she saw several, "Richard, have you made a playlist?" And I never thought of it. Well, there are 30 of them in the playlist now. I have a new one that's going to premiere tomorrow morning. I usually record it at the time I'm talking to you, Carolyn. So I
Yeah.
recorded it yesterday. and it's a beautiful song. I'm not going to say what it is, but I'm revisiting and warming up my fingers with those concerti like the Tchaikovsky. Um, there's a wonderful work I do called Yamikra, a Black Rhapsody by James P. Johnson, the Arensky, so that when the orchestras reunite, when they come back fully, and when we can open the concert halls, this boy is going to be ready.
I hear you. I hear you. Well, Richard, it has been a joy speaking to you, and I mean, there's so much more we could get into, but I'm just going to say that I thank you for spending time with me today. Your story is very unique, and it is so wonderful to hear about your accomplishments and your continued growth. Because people, what he didn't talk about was his classically black lecture series that he does. I was fortunate enough to hear it when we were at the
Alston,
conference in Boston, and he works with young people out at Essex County
County College.
College,
Mhm.
where he's the head of the music department. So a lot of different areas where he is pulled and pushed and influencing and being influenced, because our students also teach us things as well. And Richard, I just wish you all the best. Make sure you wear your mask.
Oh, definitely.
Wait, I
And
have mine here. I have several. Make sure you wear your mask.
all of mine are in my
Hand,
car.
hand sanitizer, protect your eyes.
Yes,
And when
yes.
this is passed, we will all reconvene.
And I just
Okay?
want to close with one final statement.
Yeah.
We started off talking about legacy. You probably can't see it, but right here is John Henry Walker. Right here. When I practice, he's looking at me.